Alright, day 2, 5th grade ELA, The Cod's Tale. Refrigeration and freezing had not yet been invented, and fresh fish spoiled quickly, so only people who lived on the coast could eat fish. But the salted cod of the Biscays could be stacked in carts and carried inland without spoiling. For this first time, many Europeans could eat fish. So salting. The Biscays did not just dry the cod as the Vikings had. They salted it too. Unlike the Vikings, the Biscays had a plentiful salt supply from trade in the Mediterranean. Dried and salted cod preserved even better, and it could be soaked in water and turned back into a soft, flaky fish. Here again we have a timeline, and we'll talk about that shortly. Explorers. While the Biscays were fishing secretly, other Europeans were exploring the world, often using sturdy Biscay ships, hiring Biscay navigators, and eating Biscay salted cod. Christopher Columbus did all three in 1492, when he sailed west looking for a route to Asia and landed instead in the Caribbean islands. Columbus was an Italian whose voyage was financed by the Spanish king and queen. John Cabot, an Italian who was also looking for a route to Asia. In 1497, Cabot landed in Newfoundland, which he claimed for Britain. Here he had stumbled across the Biscay secret. His crew reported that the water was so thick with codfish, they only had to dip baskets in the water to scoop them out. Soon, everyone was coming to North America for the codfish. The Portuguese, the British, and the French all fished in the large cod schools off Canada. They reported seeing Biscays. Soon, even said they heard local tribesmen speaking the strange Biscay language. In the 17th century, the rich cod fishing land was divided between the two most powerful nations, Britain and France. The Biscays protested, saying that as the discoverers, they too were entitled to a part of North America. All they wanted was the right to fish there. But they had never planted a flag, never made a claim, never told anyone, and now they had lost their fishing grounds. So, the thing starts at 1492 when Christopher sailed to the Caribbean, all the way to John Cabot in 1497. Giovanni de Franzino finds and explores what is now New York in 1524. 1535, Jacques Cartier explored and claims the mouth of the St. Louis River for France. And in 1576, Sir Martin Frobisher leaves England on the first of 3 voyages to find the Northwest Passage. God becomes American. Or cod becomes American, not God. In the early 1600s, a small religious group that had fled from England to Holland was looking for a permanent home, a place where they could practice their religion and prosper. They considered an area on the northeast coast of South America said to be El Dorado, the legendary lost city of gold. They also considered North American. One day, these pilgrims gathered around a map of the coast of the little-known North American continent. The map had been drawn by John Smith, a famous British adventurer, and it showed a small hook of land with a funny name, Cape Cod. In 1602, Bartholomew Gosnold, a British explorer, had named the peninsula Cape Cod when sailing the New England coast. He reported that his ship had been constantly pestered by cod. In 1614, John Smith, who had helped establish a permanent British colony at Jamestown with Gosnold, charted the coastline of New England. He used Gosnold's name for the peninsula of Cape Cod. The voyage was famous for Smith having earned a fortune by catching 47,000 cod off the coast of America and selling them in southern Spain. In 1620, the Pilgrims set sail on the Mayflower and landed near Cape Cod, hoping to catch cod and sell it for great sums of money too. They decided to settle there and named their colony Plymouth. Tongues, which have a rich taste and glutinous texture, are not really tongues, but the throat part under the chin. This is just a recipe of how to make stewed codfish tongues. Yuck. Winter in Massachusetts. During their first 2 years in America, many pilgrims starved to death. Winter is an habitable. The hungry pilgrims could have survived on dry cod as the village Vikings had done farther north, except the pilgrims did not know how to fish or hunt, nor did they know much about farming. Often they had to resort to stealing the hidden food reserves of the native people. These natives called themselves Wampanoag. They made lines from vegetable fibers, made hooks from bones, and caught cod and other fish that swam near the coastline. They loved eating the clams they gathered on the shoreline, and even showed the pilgrims how to pry them open. But the pilgrims were not familiar with clams and would not eat them at first. Only in desperation, nearly starving, would they eat clams and lobster, which grew to great sizes and crawled out of the sea onto the beaches. The pilgrims determined to succeed. They sent back to England for equipment and advice. They learned how to fish cod, dry it, and salt it, and to plow the fish waste into the soil for fertilizer. The Wampanoag, they learned about farming local crops such as corn, beans, and squash. Slowly, as they become successful fishermen, they established fishing stations along the New England coast. Finally, they not only had food, but something valuable to trade. In 1640, they sold a record 300,000 dry cod to Europe. The Cod Revolution. By the 1650s, New England was becoming an important commercial center. Cod from the coast of New England, Labrador, Newfoundland, and Nova Scotia was brought to Boston and sold to merchants who shipped it to Europe. A city was being built around Boston's deep sheltered harbor, and the waterfront was a forest of masts, crossbars, and rigging of ships from around the Atlantic. One of Boston's leading trade partners was the Bosque port of Billabong. The Boston merchants sold cod to the Bosques, and the Bosques sold them oranges, wine, and products made of iron. More and more people moved to England, not only to fish for cod, but to be merchants, shipbuilders, farmers, and craftsmen, carpenters, blacksmiths, barrel makers, furniture makers, to provide goods to a prosperous and growing colony. The cod trade transformed New England from a ragged pioneer outpost to a thriving society of growing cities and towns. Cod became the symbol of prosperity. In Massachusetts, carvings of cod decorated houses, churches, and government buildings. The merchant families of Boston, who grew wealthy trading cod, became known as the codfish aristocracy. The slave trade. As early as 1645, Boston cod traders became involved in the great crime of their time, the slave trade. For years, Europeans had imported slaves from Africa and sent them to the plantations of the Caribbean. Ships from New England sold high-quality salted cod to the Europeans, and they traveled to the Caribbean. There they sold the worst quality salted cod to Caribbean plantations to feed the thousands of Africans forced to work all day in the tropical sun, producing sugar. The Boston merchants would buy their molasses, which is made from sugar. Back in New England, the molasses was distilled into rum and sold in America and in Africa, where it was used to buy more slaves for the Caribbean, who would be fed the New England salt cod. The American Revolution. The New England colonies were ruled by the British government. When the British king decided to control the rebellious colonists by taxing them on important trade items such as molasses and tea, the colonists were furious. They had been doing well without British participation. Further laws were passed that limited even the rights of Americans to trade cod, but by then the American Revolution had begun. From 1775 to 1781, 13 of the American colonies fought the British. The colonies of the far north, Nova Scotia, Quebec, and Newfoundland remained in the British Empire. It was too cold to fish for cod in their northern winters, and so they did not develop as prosperous an economy as had given the lower 13 a feeling of independence. When in 1782 they began to negotiate peace with the British, the most difficult point to resolve was the right of the newly independent Americans to fish cod. A new kind of revolution. The The 19th century was a time of great change for Europe and North America. The skies of Britain, France, Germany, and the United States were blackening with the soot from the factory chimneys. Engine power was replacing manpower. The British learned to produce steel inexpensively, and soon steel was replacing wood. New ships were made out of steel and driven by powerful engines. At first, very little changed for fishermen. They still went to sea in wooden ships powered only by sails and lowered two-man rowboats in which to fish. The only modernization in the past few centuries had been that fishermen learned to bait a line a mile long with 1,000 hooks instead of a short line with one or two. Because the 19th century was an age of newfound science began asking, are fishermen taking too many fish? If they had enough hooks, wouldn't they take all the fish in the ocean? British scientists studied the ocean and the fish, both the herring that were used for bait and the cod they caught with it. By the 1880s, said that no matter how many fish fishermen took, there are so many fish in the ocean producing so many millions of eggs that the fishermen could go on taking as much as their boats could carry. Uh-oh. That's not good. Steel ships. In the 1880s, the British invented a large steel engine-powered fishing boat that dragged a large net to catch fish. The British was catching and eating large amounts of cod. It was the base for the most popular British meal, fish and chips, battered fried cod with French fries. Soon all the nations of Northern Europe fished with this type of boat. They all ate cod. The Danish ate it fresh with mustard for New Year's Eve. Sicilians ate salt cod for Christmas dinner. The Basques ate it salted with wonderful sauces. Caribbeans mashed their salt cod and ate it with hot peppers. The Portuguese fried it with potatoes. The Europeans caught many more fish with their new steel fish ships. But after 10 years, there were fewer cod in Northern Europe, and the new ships were not catching as many, so they built even bigger ships with bigger nets and took more fish. That's not going to go well. 20th century. In the early 20th century, a young New Yorker named Clarence Birdseye went fur trapping in Labrador, Canada. He learned to freeze vegetables in the Arctic wind and could thaw them to feed his family during this long, cold winter. In 1924, he moved to the fishing port of Gloucester, Massachusetts, and established a frozen fish factory. Now there was more than just salted cod and fresh cod. There was frozen cod. Machines cut fish fillets, put them in boxes. Older machines cut fish into sticks. Frozen fish became a popular food for schools, lunches, and homes all over the United States, especially in places ocean fish had not been able before, such as the Midwest. Fishermen learned not to freeze fish on their ships. Now they did not have to return to port to sell fish fresh. They could haul out thousands of tons of fish in giant nets, weeks after week, and keep them frozen. After World War II, submarines hunting techniques such as the spotter, airplanes, and sonar were used to find the fish in the ocean. The nets scraped along the bottom of the sea for miles. There were no longer any place for a cod to hide. The last cod. Most of the fishing nations of the world started to believe that there no longer had enough fish in the water to share with the fishermen of their nations. The Icelanders and the British even fought wars over who could fish for cod in Icelandic water. In 1975, after the third of these cod wars, Iceland declared that only their own fishermen could fish in the ocean within 200 miles of their shore. Soon, most other nations followed and declared the same kind of zones. But the fishermen caught less fish because there were fewer and fewer fish left to catch. Not only cod were disappearing. Now an estimated 60% of the species of fish that are popular eaten are showing signs of disappearing. Tuna, swordfish, salmon are becoming scarcer in the Atlantic. And with fewer fish in the Atlantic, fishermen are moving their big nets to the Pacific. There are still a few cod left in the North Atlantic Ocean, but governments and fishermen have to learn how to limit what they catch, or soon there will be no big fish left in the ocean at all. And then what will happen to the humpback whale, and the seals that eat cod bellies, and the birds that eat fish, and to the smaller fish that they eat cod, and to the smaller fish they eat, and to the zooplankton and the phytoplankton? What will happen to the man if there are no more fish?